This secretary, I know from over the years, is somebody who's committed to neighborhoods. What the things he listened to us, they made changes to HAMP, which really improved the numbers, and maybe he's still listening. We can make even some more changes.
Yep.
But yeah, amen. But the point is, I think, like Tom Curry, we have a kindred soul who understands our issues and cares about our issues. Please help me in welcoming Secretary Shaun Donovan.
He's back. Is he staring at me? I do whatever John tells me. He's telling me I'm going to take some questions at the end. There are cards on your tables. And so please use those. Don't ask me any hard questions. No. Whatever you want to ask, I'm here to talk about. But first, let me just thank John, first of all, for a very kind introduction. I was only staring at you because I admire you so much, and I've never known you to get nervous. But more importantly, John, thank you for your leadership. For so many years, you have been fighting, never giving in. We've had some dark moments in this country, in our neighborhoods, for homeowners, for renters these last 5 or 6 years. But thanks to the work that you're doing, I see in so many communities that things are turning around. We've still got a long way to go, but thank you. It's also so great to be back at NCRC with community development organizations, the lending community, fair housing organizations, advocates, of course, housing counselors. As John said, I feel at home in this group because this is where I come from. I started working in a homeless shelter in college, worked for the National Coalition for the Homeless, went to the Community Preservation Corporation in New York, have spent my whole career doing the work that you all are doing every day. And I love coming back here. It's also been such a pleasure in the first term to watch NCRC grow. Just think about this. 4 years ago when I started in this job, NCRC had 8 affiliates. Today, it's 80. In the last year alone, 50,000 families around the country you've reached by your HUD-certified counselors. That is an enormous accomplishment. And it's an important milestone this year. We can look back on 4 years, but we can also look forward to 4 more years of working together. You've made a commitment that you will train 1,400 additional counselors just in the next year. And I am so looking forward to watching and partnering with you to see what you all can accomplish in the next 4 years. Maybe it's 800 affiliates when I come back in 4 years to celebrate. No pressure, John, but congratulations. What's that? Fund? Oh, he said he needs the funding and he'll get to 800. No problem. Smart guy. But seriously, in all of our efforts, affirmatively furthering fair housing, supporting community development, and especially in housing counseling, you have proven to be remarkable, remarkable partners. And while we are making progress, the communities, the families that you work with and work in have never needed your work more. So I want to talk a little bit about how we can expand on those counseling efforts, but also the broader work that we do in neighborhoods and in regions across the country. I also want to talk about the threats that we have to the progress that we've made, and sequestration in particular, what we have to do to come together to make sure we get this country on the right track. Because for all the great work that we've done, it is so fragile, it can be reversed so quickly if Congress doesn't make the right decisions. So let me start on housing counseling, because I know so many of you are here today to participate in the housing counseling trainings. And I can't thank you enough for the commitment that you have. Whether it's buying or renting, improving financial literacy, protecting families' rights against discrimination, or even preventing homelessness, housing counselors play an absolutely critical role in helping families make smart, informed choices. That's why our vast network of HUD certified counselors is one of our greatest strengths at HUD. You all know that a recent NeighborWorks study on pre-purchase counseling showed that borrowers who received counseling were 33% less likely to become seriously delinquent on their loans, even when controlling for selection bias and the effects of this financial crisis we've been through. A recent HUD study showed that 7 in 10 at-risk homeowners who worked with a housing counselor got the help they needed to stay in their homes. And indeed, over the last 4 years, HUD-approved housing counselors have assisted more than 9 million families. And that's been 9 million families, a huge contributor. If you look at where we are today versus where we were 4 years ago, we've cut the number of families falling into foreclosure by more than half, and we are going to continue that trend if we can continue working together. Now, in order to do that, we launched a new Office of Housing Counseling led by the great Sarah Jarek, who I stole from my hometown of New York. NeighborWorks loss was the country's gain. But the point there was to really elevate the visibility and the importance of this crucial service and help to make sure that we were integrating housing counseling across all of HUD's programs at HUD. Just one example, the Office of Housing Counseling is working with FHA to develop a pilot program to embed housing counseling in FHA lending to ensure that borrowers are better prepared for homeownership. By cutting red tape, streamlining the application process, reducing unnecessary administrative burdens, and yes, we do have a few of those at HUD, we significantly improved our housing counseling NOFA in order to be better partners to all of you. We got the money out on the streets faster than we ever had in the history of the housing counseling program. Over the past year, we've reached out to many housing counselors, stakeholders across the country, including to so many of you that are here today, for feedback on what your priorities are, what your needs are, what should we be doing differently. You've provided incredibly helpful feedback on issues like improving the grant process, our monitoring and oversight efforts, and particularly as we move to implement the Dodd-Frank requirements that every counselor has to be trained and certified. That is going to be a critical part of the mission going forward. But our joint focus, let's be honest, counseling can be enormously important, but for many of the hardest hit families and neighborhoods that we work with, counseling alone is not the answer. We need to find more ways to partner on efforts that will increase communities' abilities to respond to change, to put people back to work, to be more competitive, more resilient, and more sustainable in every sense of the word. And it's our job at HUD to make sure all of you have the tools that you need to do that. It is no coincidence that the places that suffered the most during the economic crisis not only had bad loans, but they had the most distressed housing to begin with, the poorest performing schools, the least access to transportation, the most limited economic opportunity, and too long a history of disinvestment. What it takes to reverse that cycle is an all-out attack to make sure that we rebuild the ladders to opportunity that this country was founded on. That's why in the State of the Union address, the President laid out a plan to strengthen the middle class and to rebuild those ladders of opportunity into the middle class by growing jobs in manufacturing, making sure every American had the skills and the knowledge to take those jobs, starting with universal pre-K for every kid growing up across this country. And we have to make sure that when somebody works hard, they can feed their family and have a decent life. That's why we need to raise the minimum wage. That's right. But it's also critical, and the president talked about this, that we've got to focus on the places that have been hardest hit, not just by this economic crisis, but for too long. What he said is that no young girl growing up in a neighborhood in this country should have her life chances, her job opportunities, her education, even her lifespan dictated by the zip code that she grows up in. That is simply wrong in the United States of America. And so he laid out a Promise Zones proposal where we're going to start by going into 20 of the hardest hit communities around the country. We're going to build on the work that we've done in education with Promise Neighborhoods, the work we've done in criminal justice with the Burn Criminal Justice effort. We're going to build on the work we've done in community health centers. We're going to bring all of that together with the phenomenal work that you all have done in partnership with us in housing. And I want to particularly mention our Choice Neighborhoods initiative, which helps communities where public or assisted housing is dragging down that community to reinvest in HUD-assisted housing, to use the mixed finance and mixed use tools that we've pioneered over the last few decades, but to also bring other tools as well. Most important of those is our Neighborhood Stabilization Program, which, as you know, by partnering with nonprofits, local housing and community development agencies, we've acquired thousands of abandoned and foreclosed homes in neighborhoods across the country and provided thousands of new opportunities for home ownership for first-time home buyers. In those neighborhoods where we've invested, we've seen not only vacancy rates go down, but in 75% of those communities, we've seen prices start to rise because we've begun to reverse that cycle. With, at this point, $7 billion invested in NSP, we're on track to impact almost 100,000 properties around the country and to create almost 90,000 jobs. But we all know that transformation of our neighborhoods and communities doesn't happen because of federal intervention alone. It happens when all of you, our partners out in the real world, on the ground, start coming together to build a consensus about the future. And when you work together to find the funding and the partnerships in the private sector, in the philanthropic sector, and I'm thinking here about the I was at the Clinton Global Initiative when John and President Clinton announced this initiative. You all are bringing the most innovative, evidence-based solutions to some of our most complex problems. And that is what I am so excited about. With your announcement of the Growth Initiative, it's clear that you understand just how important the work of neighborhood stabilization is and how we can build on it in the years to come. So to support the work that we're doing together, to support these promise zones that the president talked about, to support your growth initiative, you will see in our budget a continued push for Project Rebuild. Project Rebuild reflects, Project Rebuild reflects one of this administration's and one of your most core beliefs, that rebuilding neighborhoods is essential to rebuilding our housing market and, in fact, our entire economy. It would rehabilitate or demolish more than 100,000 damaged or vacant properties in hundreds of communities, creating tens of thousands of jobs for the hard-hit construction industry and for all of the other things that get boosted when housing in a community turns around. But we also need to do more than just think about these individual neighborhoods. We all know that you can fix up a house, but if the family that lives there can't find a job, if they can't find a way, whether it's on a streetcar or light rail or on a bus, to get to a job, if they can't afford a car, all of those things we have to focus on whether our regions are functioning effectively as well, whether individual neighborhoods are connected up in a way that real economic opportunity exists. And so we've got to recognize that the success of a region is increasingly tied not just to the success of individual neighborhoods or even cities within that region, but to how that region manages its resources and addresses challenges as a whole. A big part of what will allow our communities to succeed is collaboration on a shared economic future through coordination of transportation, our building efforts, and land use planning. Now, our sustainability grants that we've created over these last 4 years have been critical to helping boost our nation's economic recovery. Over the last 2 years, we've awarded 152 grants totaling $240 million that have in turn secured almost $253 million in private investment and commitments from local partners. This is the largest planning effort that we've seen in 2 generations. And it has reached now about 1/3 of the American population. 130 million people live in the regions that have been touched by these sustainability investments. And this is part of a broader partnership for sustainable communities that is allowing us to, for the first time really, to coordinate efforts across HUD, the Department of Transportation, and the Environmental Protection Agency, not only combining our resources to make the biggest impact possible, but also to really advance our national conversation about what makes individual communities sustainable, whether that means green roofs and clean energy, or transit-oriented development that includes affordable housing. Now, that's a lot that we've been working on, a lot that we've accomplished. We got a lot to do in the next 4 years. But none of this will be possible to keep advancing this agenda that we share unless we can put sequestration's misguided cuts in the rearview mirror. So you're all in Washington. You clearly by now know that sequestration went into effect on March 1st. What you also know is that these cuts are deeply destructive, not just to HUD programs and the people who rely on them, but to entire neighborhoods, entire cities, entire regions. Not everybody will feel the pain of these cuts right away, but that pain is coming. It is here for millions of people already, but it is coming for millions and millions more. And let me just be specific about what the impacts of sequestration are. We all need to understand, every one of you, what's at stake here if these misguided cuts aren't reversed. Under sequestration, about 125,000 individuals and families nationwide, more than half of whom are elderly or people with disabilities, would lose assistance just in one HUD program, the Choice Voucher Program. Another 100,000 homeless and formerly homeless people, the majority of whom are families with kids, disabled adults, or veterans, will be removed from their current housing or emergency shelter programs. If that weren't bad enough, sequestration will also cause significant damage to our nation's housing market at the very time that it has begun leading our economic recovery. How will that happen? Partly because we're jeopardizing FHA's ability to process loans at a time when FHA accounts for about 1/4 of all new single-family and multifamily loans, and more than half of all new loans to African Americans and Latinos. Cuts to housing counseling grants would mean 75,000 fewer households receiving vital foreclosure prevention, pre-purchase rental, or other counseling. Think about that. All of the work that the entire NCRC organization did in the past year, 50,000 families you reached, eliminated, and another 25,000 above and beyond that, just from sequestration. Now, I don't have to tell you, if fewer families are getting counseling, fewer families are making responsible, informed choices, that group of folks that might help lift our neighborhoods, buy an NSP renovated home, they won't. That not only hurts that family, that neighborhood, it hurts our entire housing market recovery. The biggest problem with all this is that the answer is not that hard. What we need is a balanced plan where everyone pays their fair share, loopholes are closed, and we strengthen our entitlement programs. Not indiscriminate cuts that damage our hard-won recovery in neighborhoods and across the nation. Compromise from both sides is exactly what the American people deserve, because we need to fix this, and not just for a month or two. We got a lot of important work to do, I just talked about, for the next 4 years. We can't keep lurching from crisis to crisis. We have to solve this. And we need, all of us, to let Congress know that these cuts must be reversed because they threaten the recovery that we've invested so much in. The future, that's right, the future of your communities, the future of our communities depend on it. I am so proud of the work that we've done together these last 4 years, of all that we've accomplished. We have so much to look forward to in the work ahead. Let's make sure we keep moving forward and that we don't go backwards to the place we started 4 years ago, where that American dream, that basic promise, that basic ladder to opportunity was eroding and even disappearing for too many families. Thank you for inviting me here today. Thank you for all your partnership.
Okay. All right. Please.
Thank you.
All right. Is he looking at me? Mr. Secretary, will HUD be making more funding available to meet the needs of low-income, single-family elders for their home repairs that they can't afford?
It's a great question. So the primary way that we do that, that we make money available for seniors for home repair, is through the home and CDBG programs, and we do that in partnership with local communities everywhere. I know this, when I ran housing in New York, we had the largest CDBG and home grants in the country, and we did a lot of that kind of work. Here's the basic, unfortunate math of these programs. 80% of HUD's budget, and our budget is in the range of $45 billion, 80% of that budget goes to just renew existing help to low-income families. Average income of those families, $10,000 a year. So vouchers, public housing, project-based Section 8 housing, all of that, our homeless programs, 80%. Inflation makes that grow every year, right? Costs for running housing, energy, and other things, they increase. Even if it's 1 or 2% a year, what you're looking at, even if our budget stays level, to get to a 1 or 2% increase on 80% of our budget, that means a 5 or 10% decrease on the 20% that remains. And then you apply sequestration, they say, oh, well, it's just a 5% cut. Do the math. 5% quickly becomes a 25% cut. in what remains, our block grants and our other efforts. So I make the point just to say again, sequestration is so critical to reverse, not just on this one issue of can we make more funding available to seniors for home repair, but on everything else that we do that is new, that goes beyond just got a running in place to keep funding available for the existing 5.5 million families that we serve in our rental assistance programs.
Mr. Secretary, we've experienced greater success by linking housing and foreclosure counseling with community building and outreach. Would you consider greater support for the integration of these services?
Not only would I consider it, but I'll do it. I'll take all your ideas on doing that. One of the things, and John mentioned it in his opening, one of the things that we've been pushing on, John, you've been pushing on it for a while, and I think we're really making progress on, is we ought to be integrating housing counseling more into the HAMP efforts that we're making, and we are going to be, we're going to be integrating housing counseling into a whole range of other things that we're doing. One of the things I'm actually proudest of, John mentioned the mortgage servicing settlement. We now know that we're going to get more than $50 billion of benefits to homeowners around the country out of the settlement, based on this last report we got. But just on housing counseling, we wanted to make sure that there was money available to do that. Unfortunately, we have some governors who've done the wrong thing, but even just the governors who've done the right thing and AGs that have done the right thing, we have over $300 million that's been made available to housing counseling and legal services just out of the mortgage servicing settlement. So that's another example of where we're trying to find every way we can to make sure that counseling is part of all the solutions we're coming up with.
Okay. So the staff has been overruled. It's going to take 2 more questions. So I need 1 more question. Question from Secretary Donovan. What is HUD doing to ensure that people of color will continue to have access to affordable, sustainable home ownership?
Great question. So first of all, just to go back to something that I said a moment ago, FHA is an absolutely critical resource to make sure that people of color continue to have access to home ownership. And we're at an important moment. You all may have seen that FHA's finances are right on the edge. There's a chance that the value of the fund will go negative. We'll know that by the end of September of this year. And I am very concerned that this not become an excuse to take radical steps with FHA that would dramatically limit access to capital for minority families. So we will need your support in doing that. We've had to take some steps like increasing our premiums and doing other things. I am still very confident, and you heard the numbers, more than half of all African Americans and Latinos who bought a home used an FHA loan last year. I'm confident that we're still a very important piece of that solution, but that could change and we need to be vigilant about FHA's mission. In addition to that though, FHA alone is not enough. And so one of the things that's going to happen over these next 4 years is we're going to determine, either by Congress acting or by Congress not acting in a whole set of other measures, what the housing finance system of the future is going to look like, and whether African Americans, Latinos, and others will continue to have access to credit. And so it's going to be incredibly important. You will see the president already laid out 2 years ago in a white paper a very clear strategy to make sure that capital remains available. You will see that be a theme of the work that we're doing here. But I also think it's evidenced in, if you look at the qualified mortgage, the work that we did with Rich Cordray at CFPB, that I think has come out in a way that will ensure that credit remains available. The servicing rules and a whole range of other things that we put in place I think are very important building blocks in that housing finance system of the future. Each one of those pieces is important, but overall we've got to keep our eye on the prize here that capital remains available going forward.
Final question, last one. So you mentioned the post-NSP work that you'll be doing. You mentioned the promise zones that the president announced and the NCRC initiative, Growing Real Opportunities for Work Through Housing. How can we create synergy and collaboration and merge those efforts so that we're contributing to each other's success?
Well, first of all, as you know, John, we've already started on that. We were just talking about before we came out. John's working with Carol Galante and my team to look at, are there FHA products like 203K that could be very supportive? But here's what I would say. One thing I've learned not to do is to scoop my boss. And so I am not going to get into the details here of what exactly is going to be part of the funding and the pieces of promise zones. I've given you the sort of broad outline. Our budget will be out in early April. And at that point, all of the details will be made public about exactly the pieces. What we're doing on neighborhood stabilization and Project Rebuild, what we're doing on choice neighborhoods, what we're doing on these other pieces of the promise zones. And what I would suggest that we do is sit down right after that is rolled out and talk about the specific ways that we can bring those pieces together, because growth is perfectly aligned with what we're trying to achieve. I would also say that it's not just in promise zones. The hardest hit funds, we have lots of opportunities to think about how to take those at a state level and link them up with what you're doing on growth. There are lots of other places where we have opportunities to work together on this. So I look forward to 4 more years of doing that. Thank you all very much.